Hi, I'm Molly from Wild Olive, and in this video, I'm going to be helping you choose the best needle for your next embroidery or cross-stitch project. This isn't going to cover other types of needles for other needle crafts, just embroidery and cross-stitch. So I'm going to start by saying something that might ruffle a few feathers, but that is, there's not really any rules to this. It's perfectly okay for you to pick up a needle that you think is going to work and just use it. And obviously, if it doesn't work, then don't use that. But it's okay to just use the needle that makes the most sense for you. There's no real rules to this. My goal with this video is ultimately to just help make the stitching process easier for you. So with that in mind, let's get started talking about these needles. First, both embroidery and cross-stitch needles have larger eyes than other sewing needles. And let's take a look at that. So this is a cross-stitch needle here. This is an embroidery needle. This is a needle for other types of hand sewing. And you can just see the size of the eyes. And the reason for that is because with embroidery and cross-stitch, you're going to be putting more strands of embroidery floss through them versus just a single strand, usually, of sewing thread. So larger eyes on these types of needles than other types. For embroidery and cross stitch, you don't want to use a tiny little hand sewing needle like this. That's not going to work for you. Next, and this can be confusing, but with needle sizes, the higher the number, the smaller the needle. So this needle is a little bit thicker and it's a size 5, whereas this one is a little thinner and it's a size 7. The same is true for cross stitch needles, sometimes called tapestry needles. This one is a size 24 and this is a size 26. And you wouldn't just know this by looking at them. And there's not an easy way to know the actual number unless you're pulling it out of a package that is labeled that way. But you will start to get a feeling for them as you are using them. And some needles come really well labeled, and they'll come in packs where you get all of them the same size. These are all size 7 embroidery needles, all size 24 cross-stitch or tapestry needles. Some come where they are a mixed pack. These are chenille needles, which are like embroidery needles. Those are some 18s and some 22s. Some packs come, these are some fancy needles. They come with a variety of sizes. There's all the embroidery ones there, but they aren't even labeled by number. And that's because ultimately the number itself isn't what matters. It's the size that is going to work for whatever it is that you're stitching. The biggest difference between embroidery needles and cross-stitch needles is the tip or the point itself. So on embroidery needles, it has a sharp point, and that is, it's not so super sharp, but it's sharp enough to pierce the fibers of the fabric. And that's so that you can easily pass the embroidery floss through and go right through the fibers. Whereas a cross-stitch needle has a more dull, smooth, sometimes called a ball point. And that is because with cross-stitch, you are typically going not through the fibers, but between the woven fibers. So the threads of your Aida or even weave linen, you're going between them, and you don't want to actually pierce the fiber itself. And so this ball point helps to do that. Now, when you are choosing your needles, whether you're doing embroidery or cross-stitch, one of the things that you want to consider is how well that needle is going to help your threads pass through the fabric. Whether it's going through the fibers or between the woven fibers, you want it to pass through easily. If you have to tug your needle through, it probably means that you have too small of a needle. You need to go up a size, which is why when I use 2 or 3 strands of embroidery floss, I usually use a size 5 or a 7. But if I want to use all 6 strands of embroidery floss, which you can absolutely do, I recommend going up to a chenille needle. And these have a different numbering system, but they are larger needles and they are going to make it so much easier so you aren't tugging the thread through. The same is true if you are doing cross stitch, although I tend to find that the opposite effect is true. If I use a larger needle for my cross stitch, I find that it leaves holes around the stitches more because the needle has opened up the fabric more than it needs to. So then I go down a needle size, but you can do the same for both embroidery and cross stitch. If you're finding holes in your embroidery around the stitches, you probably want to go down a needle size. And if you are tugging your cross stitch through, you probably want to go up a needle size. Just try it and see what works for you. Here's the bottom line. Choose the needle that works for you. Use a needle that matches up with the type of project you're doing, whether it's embroidery or cross stitch, and then try different sizes and see what feels right for you. The goal here is to make your stitching process as enjoyable as possible. Thanks so much for watching. If you found that this video was helpful, I hope you will like it and subscribe to my channel. And if you have more questions about different types of embroidery or cross-stitch needles or other things, just let me know in the comments and I will see what else I can put together for future videos. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.